It's a pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event. I see a full room. It's about EU-Australia cooperation opportunities in energy and climate. Certainly on energy, there is a lot of need for cooperation outside our current areas. My name is Christian Egenhofer. I'm an Associate Senior Research Fellow here at CEPS. I will be the moderator this evening. And before we start, I would like to welcome the Ambassador Caroline Miller from the Australian Embassy, and thank her also and her team for the excellent cooperation in setting up this meeting. And then I would like to go to the Minister, welcoming you, but also asking you to go to the floor. The idea is that the Minister will give a short keynote address, talking a bit about the priorities of Australia and of course about the topic. And then we are having a conversation together with the Minister and the EU Climate Change Ambassador Marc Vanheukelen as we go. And I hope that you will all very actively engage in the debate so that we have a conversation not just between the three of us, but between all of us. Please, Minister, if you would like to take the stage. Minister Bowen is a minister since climate change minister, been a minister since a long time ago, a climate change minister since June 2022. And I'm not sure whether you get today the first real dose of EU policy or you've been there before. Now, previously, he was had many ministerial appointments, including also in the cabinet. He was treasurer and also a minister for research and education or something like this. I've seen he has not really been minister for the real tough stuff in the EU, which is trade and agriculture, but this might still be coming. The Minister, the floor is yours. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christian, for hosting us today. Thanks for all the efforts your very fine institution has put into hosting us, and I'm looking forward to a very good conversation. I'm also honoured to share the floor with Ambassador Marc Vanheukelen later on, and of course I want to acknowledge Australia's very distinguished and senior Ambassador Caroline Miller and your team. It's a great pleasure for me to join you tonight. I'm honoured to be addressing an institution as respected as this one, and my speech tonight comes towards the end of my trip to Europe, in which the weather has been very cold and the welcome has been very warm. Warm because since the change of government in Australia, the climate ambitions and agenda of Australia and the European Union are very closely aligned. And warm because Australia and Europe's different places in the renewable energy supply chain are so complementary and lend themselves to such cooperation and indeed, in my view, to very substantial and comprehensive partnership. I wanted to come to Europe at this time of year when governments are grappling with the challenges of winter to underline the importance of this partnership. It provides a very acute backdrop to the challenge facing our friends in Europe and to the opportunities of the Australia-EU energy partnership. And my message tonight is the same as my message in my bilateral meetings with my counterparts in Germany, France, the Netherlands, Austria, and indeed the EU. It's a three-part message. Firstly, we agree with you. Renewable energy is the long-term solution to our energy challenges. I know my country has not been a constructive player in the international drive to renewable energy over the last decade, but that has changed. Australia is under new management, and we're determined to play a leading and highly engaged role in dealing with the challenges and opportunities of this massive energy transformation. Secondly, Australia and Europe are, and increasingly must be, key partners. Europe has huge energy demands, driving its world-class manufacturing and supporting its population through the seasons. Australia can and will be a renewable energy powerhouse. And we can also play a role in ensuring, as much as possible, Indo-Pacific and European approaches are consistent on things like regulation, standards of origin and other key matters in relation to green hydrogen and other renewable energy, and that's been a key factor of our meetings in Brussels over the last day or so. And finally, that the successful conclusion of negotiations of a bilateral trade agreement will be a key moment in taking this partnership to its full potential. Now, around the world, people who don't support the transition to renewables are quick to blame clean energy for the current global energy crisis. I've been pleased that this has not been so much an issue in my discussions in Europe, and I haven't seen this conversation play out in Europe. It has been playing out at home in Australia. It is, of course, entirely disingenuous. These people are always looking for an excuse to avoid the transition to renewables. If it wasn't this, it would be something else. Of course, governments in Europe have had to take short-term measures to ensure ongoing energy reliability. But against that backdrop, Europe has continued with the task and has indeed redoubled its efforts in the transition to renewables. And this is very welcome. I wholeheartedly commend the EU's steps to quicken the transition, including through the Repower EU plan. The fact is that this crisis has underlined the risk of over-reliance on dependence of fossil fuels from limited sources. Vladimir Putin has weaponised energy, and the geopolitical crisis has generated much energy instability. But there is no geopolitical crisis and there is no individual who can stop the sun shining and the wind blowing. Renewable energy, supported by storage and transmission, is the most secure form of energy. Now, important element of my trip here, of course, to Europe and particularly to Paris is my engagement with the IEA and Fatih Birol. And I agree with Fatih when he said, when people misleadingly blame clean energy and climate policies for today's energy crisis, they are, intentionally or not, moving the spotlight away from the real culprits, gas supply crunch and Russia. So, of course, while we need to navigate a period of instability in fossil fuel markets, we share the EU's determination to accelerate the transition to renewable energy. Now, our government has now been in office for 8 months. Restoring Australia to climate leadership at home and abroad has been very high on our agenda. We passed our Climate Change Act through Parliament, enshrining our emissions reductions in law, becoming one of only 38 countries to legislate our targets. And we're well on the way to lifting renewables to be 82% of our energy grid by 2030. But we are just getting started. We're a medium-sized country with large-sized climate ambitions. And this brings me to my second point. Australia and Europe must be key partners. Of course, we share many similarities. We're both large, advanced industrial economies. We are both seizing the economic opportunities of the transition. We're both making the transition to renewables, in our case, from the current rate of 32.5% to 82% in the next 83 months. And like the EU, we are now committed to ambitious climate action. But we also have differences, not differences of view, but differences of circumstance. It's actually these differences which, in my view, drive us together more than the similarities do. The differences are that Europe has significant demand for energy to power a sophisticated manufacturing sector, while Australia is energy rich. Australia is an energy exporter, but increasingly that energy will be renewable. Our ambition is crystal clear. We want Australia to be a clean energy export powerhouse. We have some of the best solar resources in the world. We have above standard, above average offshore and onshore wind. And we're putting in a framework to ensure that offshore wind becomes a reality in the world's largest island. And we want Europe to be a key recipient of that renewable power. Now, by some estimates, Australia's renewable energy could generate more than 8 times the current global energy demand. I'll just say that again. By some estimates, we in Australia could generate as much as 8 times the world's total demand for energy. Or to put it another way, one of our preeminent economists, Ross Garnaut, has argued that we could reduce global emissions by as much as 8% by the export of our zero emissions energy. That's more than our own domestic agenda would ever achieve, and indeed more than Europe's could achieve. 8% reduction by our emissions. Or to put it another way, another example, if we put solar panels on 3% of our landmass, it would generate 600 million tonnes of green hydrogen every year, which is 10 times Germany's needs, as one example. This gives us a flavour of the scale of opportunities before us. We already produce almost half of the world's lithium, and we're the third largest producer of cobalt and the fourth largest producer of rare earths. This is another opportunity for us. And under our government, as well as exporting these raw materials, we want to add value, we want to see us refine and process more, and we want to provide these goods to Europe and to others. And I welcome the comments made by President von der Leyen last week in Davos, where she noted that we will rely, talking of Europe, ever more on international trade as the transition speeds up to open up more markets and to access what is needed for industry, citing a desire to conclude negotiations on trade agreements, including with Australia. Now, the key agreements I've signed this week are a good step forward. Of course, when it comes to renewable energy exports from Australia to Europe, hydrogen and green hydrogen will be the key. We've signed important agreements in the Netherlands yesterday with my friend Rob Yetten, because we see Rotterdam as a key access point to Europe, and we're working very closely with the Netherlands government to ensure that we have the right arrangements in place. In Berlin, I joined the Minister for Education and Research, Minister Stark-Watzinger, to announce funding for various green hydrogen projects in Australia, from South Australia to New South Wales to Queensland. And importantly, we also released the High Supply Report. And some people ask me about the economics of exporting green hydrogen from Australia to Europe because of the long distances involved. That report makes it clear. The economics stack up. It's desirable, it's viable, and it's necessary. And the distance between us should be no impediment to building a very strong supply chain of green hydrogen from Australia to Europe. This is all part of our agenda. But of course, we can do more. And an ambitious and comprehensive EU-Australia Free Trade Agreement will buttress these cooperative relationships even further and take our economic partnership to a new level, providing new opportunities for our businesses to engage in greater trade and investment activities in renewables. But of course, it's not a one-way street. We're not just talking about Australian exports to Europe. True partnership is based on true exchanges. Australia is renewable energy rich, and we are capital hungry. European investment in Australian renewables is very welcome. Investment by European companies already comprises 20% of the total solar and wind energy generation projects that are invested in the Australian grid. This is a substantial number, but I'm confident it's going to grow. You don't need me to tell you what important players European companies are in the renewable space. Recently, Jose Ignacio Sanchez Galan, the global head of Iberdrola, visited Australia. He met with myself and also with the Prime Minister. We both had the same message for him. Large investments in Australian renewables are very welcome. Iberdrola is one of the leaders in the Australian market, with over 1,000 megawatts of installed capacity and a commitment of investing €3 billion in developing Australia's renewable energy sector. But I actually said to Jose Ignacio, that's great. Would you consider tripling that figure? Because that's how welcome European investment is in Australia. And they aren't alone. Iberdrola isn't alone in seeing the benefits of investment in Australia. Another example, Neoen owns and operates 16 large-scale renewable energy projects in Australia, over 2,000 megawatts. They include 5 wind farms, 7 solar farms, and 4 battery storage facilities. Now, one of the reasons we enshrined our targets in law is to send the message to investors in Europe and elsewhere that Australia has a stable, clear investment environment, particularly when it comes to renewable energy. And I've received the feedback from investors here and around the world, and I've received it very clearly. That message has been received, and there's huge renewed investment and interest in Australia. Now, of course, the global challenge maximises the need for global cooperation. We recognise Europe's strong leadership on climate and clean energy, and we recognise Europe and constituent members' interest in the Pacific. And we've been exploring ways to work together to support the Indo-Pacific in the transformation of the energy system. Of course, in Australia, we also have key partnerships with Japan and Korea to accelerate the development and deployment of clean energy, building new hydrogen supply chains and finding ways to decarbonise the iron and steel value chain. My key point in my meetings with counterparts in Brussels over the last few days has been, as Europe develops its regime, quite rightly in a way we support, let's work together to ensure that we are coordinating, particularly across Europe and the Indo-Pacific, so that systems are complementary and interoperable, and I've been very pleased with the response. As I said, we welcome and recognise Europe's strong links to the Pacific. It's clear that several European governments are prioritising leadership in the Pacific, which we very much welcome. And of course, we've elevated climate partnership in the Pacific as a key element of our new government's foreign policy. We're bidding to host COP31, but we are bidding to host it in partnership with the Pacific. It will be a genuine, the bid has been a genuine partnership of equals, and if we win the bid, will be a COP of equals in hosting with the Pacific a very important meeting in Australia. So whatever role we can play to accelerate the transition and action, we will do so, and we'll do so in partnership. So a number of colleagues and counterparts have, even in the last few days, reminded me and raised the devastation of our country in 2019 by the bushfires. Many people I meet overseas still express condolences and support and concern. Around the world, of course, these natural disasters are becoming ever more frequent, ever more severe, and increasingly unnatural. No country, no region, no town, no family, no person is immune. And of course, it will get much worse if we don't act. The 2019 bushfires destroyed approximately 24 million hectares of natural land, taking 33 lives directly, and another 450 people lost their lives from smoke inhalation. But let me tell you this. If climate change isn't checked, the climatic conditions which led to those bushfires will be the norm by the 2040s. And they'll be regarded as a good year by the 2060s. My friends, we cannot let that happen. The Pakistan floods, the heat wave we saw in Europe last summer, these can't be allowed to become the average, to become the norm. Nor can the myriad of natural and, as I say, increasingly unnatural disasters which display themselves every week around the globe. The science is clear. Emissions reduction over the next decade is vital to holding the world as close as possible to 1.5 degrees of warming. 2030 may, to some, sound a long way away. It isn't. It is 83 months away. We have 83 months to engineer this massive transformation in our economies. We're doing this while Europe has been faced with a crisis caused by an illegal and immoral invasion. But we're jointly resolved. Any reduction of ambition, any failure to stick to our climate targets, any retreat from clean energy is a win for Russia, because it continues global dependence on the exact energy sources that they are using to hold the world to ransom today. It's also clear that renewables are the answer to this crisis in the medium term. Renewable energy is cheap. The sun doesn't send a bill. The wind doesn't send an invoice. They can't be switched off by a war criminal. And of course, the transformation to renewable energy is complex, difficult, and not linear. But none of that is a reason not to try and work harder. It's a reason, in fact, to work even harder. Friends, people don't elect us to do the things that are easy. On the contrary, the opposite is the case. But these hard things are best tackled together, in partnership. And that hand of partnership is what I've been offering on behalf of Australia to Europe over the last few days, on Australia's behalf. And I know from all my conversations this week that that partnership is reciprocated and will bear fruit. It's in Europe's interests, it's in Australia's interests, and it's the world's interests. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Ambassador. You saw from the applause you have a lot of new followers here. I would now like to ask Marc Vanheukelen to come take the other seat. Marc is Orkla's advisor and ambassador at large for climate change for the European Union, or for the EU's External Action Service. And previously he was ambassador at the WTO in Geneva, and he was a long time official in DG Trade. Before I ask the Marc Vanheukelen to respond, and I ask one more question which was triggered by your comments, I would like to make a few announcements for the proceedings. We're gonna have here a conversation, and as I said, it would be good that you engage, ask concrete, ideally provocative questions, and avoid from long statements. That's not what we needed. Also, make sure that you bring yourselves to the point, because it will be recorded, so you will be there in the cyberspace for a long time. After the meeting, courtesy of the Australian mission or embassy, we have white wines waiting for you, where we can exchange ideas and deepen our cooperation on energy, climate change, and whatever else you wish. Now, with this, I would like to start entering the discussion. Marc, just before, as I said before, you comment. Minister, I have a question. When was the Australian Tesla moment? Now, the Tesla moment was when we in Europe said, yeah, internal combustion engine are the best and cannot be replaced, electrical vehicles are bad, until we had the Volkswagen diesel scandal and the Tesla cars. Have we reached in Australia the Tesla moment? Is this unreversible, the new policy?
Yes, I think so. I'm not sure if there was an exact moment, but there's been a shift change. The bushfires were key in Australia. The conversation, frankly, changed. Also, in the recent election, there's been a debate in Australia for about 20 years. And one side of politics has argued for action on climate change as a moral and international obligation, and another side has argued it will come at a cost of your job. We managed to shift that conversation in 2022 to say, actually, yes, action on climate change is a moral obligation, it's an intergenerational obligation and an international obligation, but guess what? Even if that wasn't the case, it's in our economic best interests. It will create jobs. It'll create investment. We can be an energy powerhouse, renewable energy powerhouse, and create our policy 604,000 jobs, with 5 out of 6 of them in Australia's regions. That was the shift. And to have the business community so strongly endorsing our policies from opposition was a shift. And I think it's very difficult now to go back to the old style of debate in Australia. Some are still trying it. You know, no country has 100% support for climate action, but there's been a huge shift in the debate in Australia, and I think it would be very hard to go back. I was asked in an interview today, are the climate wars over in Australia? I think they're in retreat, in substantial retreat. And I think there's now broad consensus. We managed to get our Climate Change Act through both houses of Parliament, even though we only have a majority in one of those houses of Parliament. We got it through both houses of Parliament. We've got all our legislation through both houses of Parliament. And importantly, as you know, Australia's a federation, and every state and territory is on board. If you walked into a meeting of our energy and climate ministers, which I chair, of all the states and territories, you, Christian, couldn't say that guy's Labor, that guy's Green, that guy's Liberal. We've got 3 political parties represented around the table of the energy ministers: Labor, Liberal and Green, all 3 parties. We're all working together. That's a shift change, and I think it's very hard to reverse that.
The territories were much further advanced already, I understood, and now you have just ratified what was to come.
Well, we've provided a framework for their action.
Yeah.
And before they were filling a void, a vacuum. Now we're working together. So we welcome them working. I don't want the states withdrawing. I want them doing more, but I want them doing more in a consistent framework, and they want to do it in a consistent framework. It's working very well together.
Thank you. Marc, look, the climate change minister was sounding like the promoter of investment. Are you doing the same, or are you also going around and promote Europe as investment for climate change technologies? But I would also like to hear, whether you have comments on the minister.
Thank you, Christian. Well, first of all, it's with the current Australian government, it's not easy to find a lot of issues on which we don't agree. And that has to do with the fact that, first of all, now this government has clearly changed tack. You have raised your ambition to, 46%?
43.
Of a cut of greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 compared to 2005, which is a big change from the 26% you had. You have also a lot of ambition on renewable energy. So we're basically on the same page as far as ambition is concerned. Obviously, we probably will have to go further than what we have already pledged. We have said that we will go to at least minus 55%. On the other hand, as you rightly reminded us, I have to put it there? All right, sorry. As you rightly reminded us, the clock is ticking. If you talk in terms of carbon budgets, if you want to stick to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we still have 8 years. If you want to stick to 2 degrees Celsius, you have something like 15 or 20 years at the current level of emissions. We need to cut emissions this decade, and this decade is still 7 years. We need to cut by 43%, which is a colossal amount. The latest forecast I saw for 2023 is that we're going to increase, not decrease, increase. So the challenge is colossal, and we have done, or we have said we're going to do minus 55. You're going to do minus 46, but there is definitely more to come. It will be inescapable, at least if we want to live up to what we promised in 2015 in the Paris Agreement. Another reason why we, in a way, are natural partners is because, as you pointed out rightly, we are so complementary. Australia is incredibly endowed by nature. Raw materials, wind and sun, second to none. We have a big demand for energy, but nature hasn't spoiled us. It used to spoil us in coal and what have you, but those are fossil fuels. We have quite a bit of wind. Our solar is not too bad, but we don't have any, or basically any, of the raw materials that you need for the clean energy transition. And you are a powerhouse in lithium, in cobalt, in rare earth metals. And because of the fact that you are a stable, prosperous, dependable country, obviously you are a partner of choice for us. And so in a way, it's kind of normal that we are going to intensify our cooperation. Obviously, you're far away, but indeed, technology can overcome, at least in part, the handicap of distance. If you want to ship sun and wind to us, it can only go through green hydrogen or green ammonia. And so you'll have to put it on a boat and then bring it to us, and then we'll try to get it in our ports and send it through our pipes onto those who need the energy. In Repower EU, we have said that we're going to try and produce 10 million tons of green hydrogens ourselves, but by 2030, we also need to import 10 million tons of green hydrogen, and obviously we're looking around in the world who could do that for us, and Australia definitely is on our map. So bilaterally, I think there is a lot we can do together. I think also multilaterally, we are more and more on the same page. I mean, in Sharm el-Sheikh, I think we were very much of the same opinion. In G20 as well, we are pushing the same file. One big thing that will come up in the next few months is a reform of the multilateral development banks to make sure that more climate finance is available. That, in my view, is one of the biggest challenges that we don't hear enough about. If you really want to achieve the Paris Agreement objectives, even a conservative estimate says that every year the world will need 3,000 billion euros or dollars in investment. 3,000 billion dollars in investment every year. Right now, we are at 600 million. So yes, it is climbing, but the gap is still huge. And we have to ask ourselves two questions. How can MDBs and others do better? And secondly, how can we leverage private finance? The money is there. The private sector can mobilize that money, but how do you de-risk climate finance, definitely in emerging countries? Because in developed countries, the train is rolling, but it's not yet there in emerging economies. Emerging economies which become more and more important for climate change. I mean, Asia is responsible for 70% of emissions. European Union right now has 7.5% of emissions. We're not going to save the planet. No, others will have to do it with us. That's the multilateral field. Where I think we can also step up our cooperation is plurilaterally. Obviously, multilateral is first best, but unfortunately, multilateral is going too slow for the urgency of the climate challenge. And so we need coalitions of the willing. We have done a few, one of which is what we have co-led on with the US, which is the Global Methane Pledge, to cut methane emissions by 30% in 2030 compared to 2020. Why? Because methane is the top priority. It's the cheapest and fastest way to slow down global warming. So we're very happy to have now Australia in our midst. 1 year and a half ago, we were 2. Now we are 150. India, Russia, China still not in. But we have to now take the methane file forward in energy, in waste, and in agriculture. And we'd love to partner with Australia on that, not only in energy, natural gas and coal in particular, but also in agriculture for developed countries. Methane is associated with livestock, and Australia is a big cattle owner. The same goes for the things we're doing with a number of emerging economies. With South Africa, with Vietnam, with Indonesia, we have launched Just Energy Transition Partnerships, which is in a way a new model of a transaction between an ambitious developing country or emerging country and the G7. We want to expand that membership, and we very much would like Australia to be part of that, especially in Asia, Indonesia and Vietnam. There may be others to come, where we want to expedite the exit from coal. You're also gradually leaving coal behind you. We are going to do that, I think, by 2035. It would be good to know when you think Australia could say goodbye to coal. So lots of things that we can work on. The EU doesn't have the raw materials, but it has a number of things that you will find interesting. The first is that, yes, indeed, we still have quite a bit of capital to invest. Secondly, we have a number of leading companies in the green revolution. We were among the first to start, and so we have a bit of first mover advantage, especially in wind, also in energy efficiency, to some extent battery, at least in terms of research. In solar, we got wiped out, but we still have quite a bit of know-how with regard to the newest technology in solar. We are never going to manufacture solar panels anymore. We used to do that, but that's now part of history. But so there are a number of things that we can offer, and be it through the FTA or otherwise, we have to take our cooperation to a new level. Back to you, Christian.
Thank you, thank you. I was afraid already that this becomes too harmonious, but but I have a question, maybe first to the minister. Marc mentioned, when is Australia getting out of coal? I'm not going to ask you this one, but we had a lot of debate here, driven by civil societies, NGOs. Saying, the fossil fuel needs to stay in the ground in order for us to meet the climate change challenge. And that is not just the NGOs, this is also the IMF saying, most of the fossil fuel reserves which we know needs to stay in the ground. What do you tell your fossil fuel companies about that one? And is there any plans to try, in a way, forcefully also to keep that stuff in the ground?
So our approach is to manage the transition and speed the transition. And as we do so, we have a challenge, all of us. Keep the lights on. That's important. it's important because it's the right thing to do. It's also important because if you fail, you will lose community support overnight. We have huge community support for the transition at the moment in Australia. But if we fail and we have reliability problems, even if it's not caused by renewable energy will be blamed and we will lose that community support. So we need to keep a reliable system as we undertake this massive transition domestically to 82% renewables in our grid. That means ensuring, as we all have to do, peaking and firming as we build the storage and the transmission. We have to prepare Australia for, Dunkelflaute. We're in Europe, I'll use the term. And we need to have the much more efficient transition of renewable energy, transmission of renewable energy around our grid, which means we have to upgrade our grid. We already have the largest grid in the world. National Energy Grid is the largest energy grid in the world. It goes from the top of Queensland to the bottom of Tasmania to the centre. But it needs to be expanded because the thing about fossil fuels is one advantage they have is they're all geographically clumped, whereas renewable energy is spread across the country, so you need to move it around. And when the people say the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, yeah, sure, but it's blowing somewhere and it's shining somewhere in Australia, so you move it around. This is all a long way of saying, while we're doing that though, we're going to need peaking and firming, and increasingly that will be gas. As coal-fired power leaves the system, all the coal-fired power stations are either coming to the end of their natural life or decisions are being taken to close them. There's a timeline, and that timeline is only going to get quicker. As that happens, we need to keep reliability in the system. In Australia, we all have a choice about how you keep reliability in the system as you're building the storage and the transmission. You've got coal, which is leaving. You've got nuclear, which we don't do in Australia and won't do. And you've got gas. So gas is the least worst option. And it's flexible. The one virtue of gas is you can turn it on and off very quickly. At the moment, 15 minutes, increasingly 5 minutes. So that'll help us with that transition. And I say that, when I'm doing forums, I say, what about gas? Why are we still extracting gas? Because we need it to keep the system reliable. Increasingly, it'll be renewables. At the moment, about 32%, 82% by 2030. And what's left will increasingly be gas. And then, we'll make an assessment about how quickly we can move beyond 2030. But gas is going to be in the system for some time to come to keep that reliability underpinning.
Yeah, Marc, I think you had indirectly the answer on the coal exit. Just need to do the calculations. Can I get back to the plurilateral activities? We had this proposal by the German G7 presidency on a climate club, which was essentially linked to carbon pricing, which did not receive, if I may put it like this, a great welcome everywhere. We have the CBAM here in the European Union, which at the moment at least is designed on carbon pricing metric. Minister, how do you see, and then I come to you, Marc, how do you see climate club, this plurilateral coalition of the willing, however you want to call it and whatever political connotations it has, how do you see this evolving and how could we have a plurilateral Australia, EU plus many others arrangement if there is carbon pricing in the EU, which is the flagship, which is the policy, and in Australia you're going down another route?
Well, I think the important thing is that the systems are complementary and we understand each other. And I've had this discussion with senior EU officials today talking about our policy is called safeguards, which is our architecture to require emissions reduction from our 215 biggest emitters, which is a big change that the new government has brought in. It's a baseline and credit scheme. Now, how does that interact with the European system? How would it be treated by a CBAM in Europe is something that we are discussing. Our policy objective is the same. Of course, nobody expects the two systems to be exactly the same, but complementary and heading in the same direction. In relation to the Climate Club, it's been raised with me. We'll consider it joining. I want to better understand its objectives. What would it actually be designed to do? And how would it achieve it? I think we are increasingly getting a picture of that. and how would it interact with the CBAM and the EU is something that I think is still being fleshed out. We have a crowded architecture already. I could spend all day going to meetings of alliances, clubs, groups, and climate in the world. And that's, there's a place for that, but we don't want to just do things for the sake of it. If there's a benefit in the climate club and Australia can play a role, we're open to that. Germany has spoken to us about it and others. But let's do some work together to better understand what it would achieve. And I think at least now that Australia has a decent climate policy, we can consider these things. There was no point considering it before. And people can consider us. We have ticked the box of the entry. Do you care about climate? Do you have good policies? Tick yes. Okay, come in and talk to us. If you haven't, don't bother coming in that door. We get the entry to the door. What we do after we've entered the room is up to mutual consideration.
The safeguard measures, is that a reaction to the CBAM, or it was there before? You adjusted it or you sharpened it, if I may want to take this term. But has that been also in the light of the CBAM discussion? I guess you have discussion. I don't know whether you want to be indiscreet about your discussion.
No. It's look. Safeguards has always been there, or been there since 2013 or so, formally in 2016. But the baselines were too high and too many loopholes. We've tightened all that. We didn't do it because of the CBAM, but I have said to Australian industry, increasingly, carbon tariffs are going to be a reality in Europe and elsewhere, and if we want to avoid them, we have to tighten our policy. So it's related, not entirely causal. We would have done it anyway to reduce emissions, but it has a byproduct that it helps us have the discussion. If we didn't have the tightened safeguards mechanism, what am I going to come to Europe and talk about why a CBAM shouldn't apply to us or why we should at least get consideration? I'd have nothing. And Australian industry welcomes that. When I announced, here's the thing, for those of you who know Australia well, imagine this. This happened a few weeks ago. I announced the tightening of the safeguard mechanism. I announced the reforms. I did it in Gladstone, in Queensland. It's the energy capital of Eastern Australia. You fly into Gladstone and it's power stations, it's mines, it's gas facilities, it's everything. I went there because you have to front up and talk to the communities most impacted. I held the press conference on the grounds of Rio Tinto, and the chief executive of Australian Rio Tinto came to the press conference and said, we welcome this government action. If you know Australia, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, if I told you that story, you'd say, somebody come and get Chris and take him, he's not feeling well. He's talking nonsense, he's lost it. This is the remarkable change in Australia. And it's possibly because of goodwill. That's what we're trying to achieve, and that's what we are achieving.
Thank you. I think there is a piece of good news in the latest agreement on the CBAM ETS. It offers the prospect of an exemption if you have carbon pricing in place. Carbon pricing, can be a stretched notion. And, if you just need to prove that your credit and baseline safeguard measure is carbon pricing, you could fall under it, but I'm sure there are discussions. Now, Marc, how do you see the CBAM discussions with Australia from the European end, and maybe also, taking the point further on the climate club, which on the German concept at least was very much based to carbon pricing, EU carbon pricing. How do you see the CBAM ETS complex and the climate club from the side?
Well, CBAM is in a way the sort of pendant to the ETS. We have put in place, or we're going to put in place CBAM. The first 2 years a dress rehearsal, and then 2026 it kicks in for real. We've done it because of carbon leakage. If the EU tightens its norms and its stringency with regard to emissions, and the rest of the world doesn't follow, then there is a risk that either we're going to get imports of countries that have laxer rules, or companies will basically move out of the EU and start producing elsewhere. That gives rise to a number of economic problems, but most importantly, it will mean that then emissions do not get reduced, they simply shift from one jurisdiction to another. CBAM has indeed the possibility to take into account the carbon pricing systems of the countries from where the exporter is located, be it through carbon taxes, take the case of Canada, or through a system of emissions trading where there is a price that you pay for the emissions that you have had or that you had indeed in the production of the good you're exporting to the EU. With regard to the detail of all this, it's much too early to say how it's going to pan out because now that we have a deal on CBAM, we now need to start elaborating the secondary legislation. And in all those things, the devil sometimes is in the detail. Now, how does that relate to a climate club or the climate club idea? The climate club, as conceived by Germany and as later on, say, refined in the G7, has three components. The first component is indeed to have a discussion among the club members on carbon pricing or other systems to reduce emissions, to compare notes and see to what extent these things could be made compatible with one another. We have always gone for carbon pricing. I mean, ask 100 economists in the world, what do you need to do first to combat climate change? 99 will say carbon pricing. And it has worked. I mean, the European Union, the workhorse of the European Union climate policy has been the ETS. The ETS has now been in existence for 15 to 20 years. It has done wonders, because it provides you with a continuous incentive to cut emissions, because there is an economic reason to cut emissions. So carbon pricing for us is a key component. Some are going down that path, others are not. And we've got to make sure that there is sufficient compatibility to the various choices. The second component of a climate club is to work together on technical regulations and standards for the new products. Example, green hydrogen. Who is going to set the specifications for green hydrogen? When is hydrogen green? Those things need to be agreed upon because otherwise I can't be trading green hydrogen, right? So these are the sort of things that we need to discuss typically in a small group. I mean, just don't think about discussing this multilaterally. 197 countries having to set a definition of green hydrogen? I mean, you must be bonkers, right? The third thing is the sort of issue I mentioned. How can G7 plus or minus provide incentives to the emerging economies to speed up their transition? That is the third component of the climate club. These will now have to be worked on further in the G7. I think quite a number of G20 countries would be interested to join. I think the idea is that the club is open. It's not going to be an exclusive club. If you want to join and you want to be constructive on all 3 points, countries can join. However, what you can't have is, as we heard the other day from an emerging country whose name I'm not going to mention, is that if I'm a member of the climate club, am I then exempted from CBAM? The answer is no.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. So, Marc, you need to meet all 3 conditions. I see a lot of traction on the second one. That's the Japanese G7 presidency. They want to push the definition of green steel, green hydrogen, green whatever. there I think there might be political traction also getting the emerging economy on the engagement. That's going to be an important part, and understand the COP31, as you have mentioned, is part of Asian engagement. Now, but will the first dimension, the first not really be a deterrent for joining the climate club? Marc, I just, wanted to tease you a bit further on that one. You can have also your personal opinion if you wish.
I know, but as an EU ambassador, I think
we can switch off the recording and then we continue.
I'm sometimes paid not to speak my mind, right? No, I think the idea is that the Climate Club becomes a forum for frank discussion on carbon pricing. And there are various models, and we've got to thrash out to what extent they can be compatible. Our view until now has been we will take into account what an exporter has paid in her or his country of production if that price is explicit. In other words, take the case of Canada. A Canadian exporter to us would probably pay carbon taxes on the emissions embedded in the product he's going to ship to Europe. Those taxes can be deducted from what he or she is due in the purchase of the certificates that would correspond to what you have to pay in an ETS. The same goes for a country that has an explicit ETS. It may be different from ours, but if it has an emissions trading scheme and an explicit price to carbon, then it can be deducted. Inasmuch as there are other systems that lead to a lowering of the emissions in the manufacturing in the country, in the third country, that will be beneficial in the CBAM context, because the lower your emissions, the less you have to pay. So if you are, for instance, very efficient because of the fact that your system has an extremely stringent baseline, that will benefit your producer in the CBAM context, because the producer will have to buy far fewer certificates than without that baseline. So that is a discussion that we're going to have. The ideas of the Climate Club have been hatched last year. They now need to be elaborated.
Thank you. Marc, there will be some further discussion or a bit more heat once we get into the voluntary carbon market, how this works. But we're not going to get into this evening. We only have until 7 o'clock and not beyond. But we're covering this as well if you're interested in the CEPS Ideas Lab, which is in 28th of February and 1st of March. Now, there's a lot of Australia-EU cooperation issues which are interesting, but please allow me to do one more on the international side, which is the favorite topic here in Brussels at the moment. I'm sure you have gone through that, which is the US Inflation Reduction Act, which has triggered quite a some radical reaction. Some talked about economic war. Now some say we need to match that funding. We need our own industrial IRA, etc., etc. So just wonder to what extent in Australia this has gotten a similar fury, and to what extent, or whether you see how you see this evolving from two sides. One is the trade aspect, by American or by Australian, by European, whatever, you name it. And the other one is, of course, what impact can it have on the clean tech investment? You cited Fatih Birol, we're far below what we need. You mentioned it yourself, figures of, Marc was mentioning the figures of investment. We're far below. So why shouldn't we be happy about somebody doing something about this investment?
Well, it has come up once or twice. Um, we have looked at it in Australia as well, but it is nowhere near as hot a topic in Australia as it is here. Let me make a few high-level points. Firstly, essentially, I agree with you. It's a good thing that America's back. We had 4 years of America vacating climate leadership and going backwards. And President Biden has brought America back. It's very welcome. And congratulations to him and his administration for steering it through a difficult Congress. He had to get it through. I know what it's like getting something through 2 houses of parliament when you don't have a majority necessarily. So you have to find a way through. So that's good. We want America as one of the G2 back. That's the first thing. Second thing, is it like we would have designed it, all of us? Not necessarily, but we respond. In Australia's case, we have a concession, for want of a better word, because we have a free trade agreement with the United States. So for value adding, processing, refining, battery making electric vehicles, it's as if we were America. We didn't ask for it. We weren't involved in the discussions. We saw the outcome through the Senate. We said, oh, that's good. Okay. So, of course, we like that, and that's a difference with Europe. We just have to be honest with that, about that. Europe doesn't have that concession. We do. And we want to refine and process and make batteries and make more parts of electric vehicles and ultimately maybe make electric vehicles. So that's good. We don't have the concession for hydrogen and other things. So in that case, we're in the same boat as Europe. But we have to be realistic. The administration, having put in so much work to get it through the Senate, they're not going to change it. You're not going to go back to the Senate and say, oh, can we reconsider that part of that part? That real politic, that doesn't exist. How they implement it and define it and interpret it is important. And I know the EU is having that conversation with the administration, which we welcome. I know that Robert Habeck and Agnes are going next week to the United States to talk to the administration. Great. Sensible implementation is very welcome. But you talk about trade wars, obviously we have to avoid that. But by the same token, what if we saw the Inflation Reduction Act as an inspiration in a good way, in a positive way, to do more? So we have a committee in Australia headed by a former chief scientist. I've asked that committee to advise me and the cabinet, what do we need to do? We have a national hydrogen strategy. It's a little bit old now. It's not taking into account the recent IRA. Should we change it? Should we update it? Should we improve it? Looking at it in a positive way. You have to see what's there and find ways of making it work. And I understand concerns and frustrations. I too, in Australia, have said, I've said it in the cabinet, I've said it in public. What we have to avoid is a great big sucking sound, sucking of investment away from Australia into the United States. I'm sure you don't want to hear the sucking sound of investment from Europe to the United States, okay? But there's more than one way of tackling that to make sure we don't have the sucking sound that we're adding, that we're all adding additionality to renewable energy investment. That's the key. We need much more of it, as you said. In fact, the United States is so active, great. But to make sure it's an additional, not sucking.
Marc, here is a positive message on the IRA. Maybe gives you inspiration for your briefings.
Well, I mean, first of all, what the EU is going to do, or what the Commission believes needs to be the response, you'll read tomorrow in the newspapers, right? Because tomorrow the College meets on the Green Deal Industrial Plan with its various components. So I'm not going to dwell on that. You'll read about that tomorrow. But on the other hand, I think the media have already covered extensively what's going to be in it. So presumably not too many surprises. With regard to the IRA from an environmental point of view and from an economic point of view. I mean, environmentally, of course, in a way, it is good news. Before the IRA, think tanks thought that the US would get to minus 25% of its emissions in 2030 compared to 2005. Whilst President Biden had said we go to minus 50%. As a result of IRA, there is now a broad scientific consensus that the US will get to minus 40, not yet minus 50. So probably in the years to come, the US will have to get into higher gear. One of the reasons why IRA doesn't get you where you should be is that the US doesn't have carbon pricing. The US only has carrots, very few sticks. The only stick that exists is in methane. But because of the fact that they don't stick a price to carbon, they really have to go the whole way with regard to positive incentives in order to get to a cut in emissions. And we hope that the US sooner or later is going to fly on 2 engines rather than 1. Now, with regard to the economic dimension, and the minister has already said it, there are a number of elements in the IRA which I think will not stand the test of WTO compatibility. Clear discrimination on the basis of nationality, local content requirements that are at variance with basic rules of international trade. All right, that shouldn't happen, but it happens. And the WTO right now doesn't have an appellate body, so it's toothless. So you can say that, you know, it's a sad thing, but you don't buy much for it. The 369 billion that will be used in the context of the IRA, provided the debt ceiling problem does not stand in the way, will indeed provide incentives for US companies and foreign companies to invest in the US. As I said, tomorrow the Commission is going to give its views on how to respond. I think it's not only an issue of the quantity of money. One of the things where the EU stands in a structural handicap vis-à-vis the US is that we don't have a federal government that can provide these tax credits. You know, and the US system is very simple, actually. You know, you invest and you get a tax credit. But that's not at all how it works here, because our systems either go through regional funds or funds for research and development, or allows for state aids from member states. It's a much more complicated system and therefore not investor friendly. And that is something that I think we really have to do better in terms of cutting the red tape for permits and in terms of making our subsidy system much more consumer friendly for companies wanting to make use of it. So it's not only an issue of how much money. I think the money we can mobilize, there are still big pots of money that have been decided on, but that still have half of the pot available. So we can reorient the money, but it's also an issue of the modalities of using it.
Thank you. We are still coming. Stay with us to the cooperation opportunities in energy security needs of Europe, which has been the last year the main issue. I'm sure you have heard about that. But before, can I just take this a bit further, this international one? In the US now, the latest fashion is, or the latest discussions are the international climate change partnership agreements. Where there is agreements between the US and other countries grouping greenhouse gas reduction objectives, however they are framed, supply security, I mean not supply security, supply chain security, critical raw materials and all this kind, and also this clean tech artificial intelligence or the technological leadership. To group that together and bring with like-minded countries some agreements together that we do certain things. It's a kind of a different climate club, if you wish. I don't know to what extent you had discussions on this, you had some reflection on this approach, whether this could not get traction because you have concrete objectives to which we all, I guess, agree. If we come to the security needs, I think these are our points we're going to be discussing.
Well, again, I think the test is, what are we trying to achieve? And does this new idea help us achieve it? That's the test. Because what we can't let happen is let activity or the perception of activity replace real substance. That's what we have to guard against. Because, it's easy to say, I know what we need is another partnership or another document or another this or another that. As I said before, we all have plenty of meetings to go to. Right? There's a crowded international architecture already. There's enough alliances, groups, everything else. So you have to guard against that. Having said that, if it's real, and it's a real partnership and it brings people together, sure. But let's just apply a test of what it achieves, and if it achieves those tests, it actually takes the ball forward, improves it, is real substance, and great. You'll find no more enthusiastic backer than me. But let's apply those tests to see what it's designed to do. If it does do those things, Australia will be all in, but we won't be all in just for activity. We'll want to see results.
Yeah. Let's then, I'm just wondering whether there are any questions. There is one. I would take a second one as well, but we can also easily do with one. There is only one, so let me just come to you here with the microphone.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Marcus Fischer from Ørsted, Global Renewables Major. So we're looking forward to the investment opportunities in Australia, especially when the offshore wind framework is ready. My question is, and Christian's had concrete questions, is concretely on how to transport green hydrogen from Australia to Europe. So in which shape or form would it be purely green hydrogen at a very low temperature, or are you also thinking of going more into products, maybe ammonia, or perhaps even products with even more value creation like steel, green steel? So how would that, in which shape or form do you envision that?
Oh, thank you. That was the question I wanted to ask, but he was my student, so
okay.
Please.
Well, look, in terms of actual transporting of hydrogen, the science and the economics will determine that. The MOUs we're signing don't determine that. We're providing the framework. So nothing in the deals with Germany or the Netherlands says we're going to do ammonia or we're going to do this or we're going to do that. We're probably going to have to try various methods to see what works best, is most efficient. Science and economics, not politics, will determine that. In relation to products, green steel, then sure. I think that's a slightly different question, different level. We're not there yet. I imagine there'll be green steel in Europe, there'll be green steel in Australia, and it'll be traded. But in terms of actually hydrogen, let's see. We don't know yet. But it won't be a decision I look at in the cabinet. It'll be a decision the scientists and the economists and the managers reach.
Thank you, Marc. Marc, a question: to what extent do you think the EU should get involved in, long-term hydrogen import? Could be one of the joint purchasing activity. And if you think this could be, has there been any feedback in your discussions with partners, whether you feel more comfortable to do a deal with Germany, the port of Rotterdam, or your son joint purchasing, this kind of thing?
No, obviously, we are looking around in the world to see who could be a good green hydrogen partner for us. When you talk to third countries, what is really amazing, sometimes even amusing, is that everyone wants to be a green hydrogen hub. Right? So you talk to countries in Africa, they say, we want to be the green hydrogen partner of the EU. You go to the Gulf, we're your green hydrogen partner. So lots of people are interested in doing business, but as the minister says, it's science and economics which in the end will determine what the best way forward is with regard to green hydrogen trade. We also don't know yet how much green hydrogen will be needing. We know that in 2030 that we have this 20 million tons target, half produced at home, half to be imported. How that will then evolve after 2030 is anyone's guess, because it's not even clear where electrification stops and where hydrogen comes in, right? I mean, there used to be a time that people thought that cars could be driven by hydrogen. I think now more and more people say that's perhaps not a good idea. Let's electrify through batteries and whatnot. We can have hydrogen for trucks or for boats or for planes, but even for planes, we'll have to see how it works. So, and then there are the hard to abate sectors like steel, cement, and chemical products. So yes, we're looking around. We will definitely need the hydrogen imports because we simply don't have enough excess electricity to produce the hydrogen ourselves. I mean, you need to have an abundant supply of very cheap electricity in order to become a green hydrogen player. Otherwise, it's a proposition that will not stand the test of economics.
We are approaching the end. Can I maybe ask you 3 more final points? The first is, we've been discussing when our gas prices were about 10 times as high as they used to be. We're discussing possibilities of cooperation. Isn't there a possibility to calm the markets by cooperation, for example, on demand destruction, or trying to cooperate rather than all rushing to the hub and trying to buy as much gas as possible? Obviously, importing gas from Australia to Europe is not the best of the ideas, but of course you're a big player in the gas market, so is Japan, etc., etc. So what do you think about ideas of more cooperation to calming the gas markets? Now, my expectation is Australia has always been a price taker. I guess your belief is relatively low, but we still have this discussion. Another one is really, what can Australia do in addition to purely market-based transaction on the critical raw material side, because there's a security aspect, and we in Europe, we are realizing we are depending on our critical raw material on mainly one country. Is there anything policy can do, or is it simply a market transaction? We just need to get the supply chains. And the third one, maybe the concluding one, what would you expect when you're hosting COP31? What would you expect what Australia could achieve? Not what the negotiations are, no, but what you could achieve in terms of making Australia a big player in the region and to get regional coherence. If there is no other question, I would leave it to you to conclude these meetings by, picking any question or all of 3 as you wish.
Well, thank you. Thank you for declaring that we've won the COP31 bid. Hasn't actually been decided yet. We're very hopeful and confident, but we don't take anything for granted. Very grateful for the support that we're receiving. We are in the same group, Western European and others. And we received lots of strong support, and France has confirmed support over the last 24 hours, which is very welcome, but we don't take anything for granted. But if we are honoured to host the COP, we'll give it our all for a very successful COP. It's too early to tell what the contours are. We don't even know exactly what's going to happen in Dubai yet, let alone in Eastern Europe and in South America and then hopefully Australia. I do want to say about Dubai, I've met with the next COP president twice, and I think, I'll be very frank, it's important that the world gives the COP a chance to work. Too many people are prepared to declare this COP a failure too early. The incoming COP president, I think, understands the need for this COP to succeed. He understands the importance of the global stocktake. And we can't exclude countries or individuals because they happen to have been involved in fossil fuels. We need countries and individuals who have been involved in fossil fuels to help with the transition. So Australia stands ready to assist for a successful COP at the end of the year in Dubai, and work closely with the COP president to do so. And I know many of us are talking about how we can best engineer and assist the COP president in developing that. I think too many people are too quick to say, oh, this is all a disaster, the COP president should resign, or UAE is a problem. Let's work together and give people a chance and judge them on their results and their success. And that's certainly the message I've expressed privately to the COP president and expressed publicly. Inevitably, I think the COP is so important that hopefully we can get to a system where informally or formally successive COP presidents are working together. You know, the G20 works in a sort of a troika arrangement where the president of the G20 works with the former president and the next president. And that cooperation between sort of successive COP presidents, I think, is something that would be very useful to engender. And certainly if we are successful in our bid, that's something we would certainly be keen to progress. And I think in terms of what we would bring to the table if we host the COP, it is, as I said at the outset, it's a genuine partnership with the Pacific. We want to see the Pacific brought to the table in a very meaningful way, not just in a symbolic way, but in a meaningful way. I certainly am talking a lot more to my Pacific counterparts than has previously been the case for Australian climate ministers. And we want to provide as much appropriate leadership, not calling the shots in the Pacific, but appropriate leadership with our Pacific partners, both when we host a COP and in every COP in between. Because these are countries, we're arguing about, you know, the impact and the natural, these are countries talking about their very existence to underline the importance of the task before us. And I think that's probably a useful point to end tonight's conversation. We're talking about the very existence of our brothers and sisters in the Pacific. So let's get it right.
Thank you. This, you know, makes me bringing this meeting. Yes. Okay. Right. Almost standing ovation. Thank you very much, Minister, Ambassador Vanheukelen, and also thank you, Ambassador Miller, for the excellent cooperation. I hope we see you soon again. I will be at COP31. Good evening.